Do you remember learning to read when you were at school? Probably not. It's a concept we as adults now take for granted. Take a second to think about what your life would be like if you couldn't identify the symbols on paper or work out the sounds these symbols make together. What a horrible thought. For some students in our classroom, this is a reality, and it is vital that we, as teachers, help support these students as soon as possible. Reading difficulties occur when a student is challenged by the specific concept of reading. It is important to know that students who are poor readers at the end of Year 1 almost never acquire average level reading skills by the end of Year 8. But we are here to support these students. Did you know that as a teacher you have 3 core legislative obligations to your students? Through the Australian Curriculum, Assessment and Reporting Authority, the Melbourne Declaration on Educational Goals for Young Australians to provide equity in your classroom, and the Disability Standards for Education. Remember, it is your role to make suitable adjustments in teaching, learning, and assessment to cater for student diversity. For your understanding, factors that are usually associated with reading difficulties are emotional and behavioural problems, mental health issues like depression and anxiety, English as an additional language or dialect, to more severe learning disabilities like dyslexia or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. These have all been known to be linked with reading disabilities to some degree. It is important to know that having a reading difficulty can lead to low self-esteem and low self-efficacy in a student, and this can be detrimental to the student than the factors that were mentioned. Many researchers recommend a response to intervention, an RTI, to be an effective tool for identifying reading difficulties as well as an evidence-based strategy for supporting students. RTI 3-tiered approach is implemented after your lesson has taken place. Tier 1 is a secondary intervention which provides greater intensity, differentiation, and time on a task. Tier 2 is intensive intervention focusing on smaller groups of students. Tier 3 is based on the results you can then determine the level of intervention moving forward. This is helpful to the students that continue to struggle with reading after the first 2 tiers. So what might a reading difficulty look like in the classroom? There are 5 key factors. First, through phonological and phonemic awareness, as we know, are the individual sounds in spoken words. Phonemic awareness and letter knowledge are 2 best predictors of how well children will learn to read during the first 2 years of school. You might observe the student having trouble completing blending activities and might hear students saying, "I don't know any words that rhyme with cat. I don't know how many syllables are in my name." The second is decoding and phonics, which encompasses developing meaning and letter-sound relationship. Teachers might note the student having difficulty matching sounds and letters and reading phonetically. Fluency relates to the ability to read with speed, effortlessly, and automatically, either silently or aloud. You might see a student becoming frustrated when reading aloud with a monotone voice and not chunking words into meaningful units. Vocabulary is the words we need to know in order to understand and communicate. A teacher might notice a student is weak in their vocabulary or asking about the meanings of words a lot. Comprehension involves gathering meaning from printed text. You might see students focusing on the wrong aspect of a text or cannot recall the sequence of events. So what evidence-based strategies can I use? We have already looked at the RTI approach as an evidence-based strategy as well as an identification method. Another strategy is using Vygotsky's gradual release of responsibility to support students with reading difficulties. It involves the teacher modelling the work, guiding the lesson, allowing the students to work collaboratively. This in itself is a strategy. Before independent work. You might have heard it being called I do, we do, you do. This approach is commonly used for whole class lessons, but can be also tailored for individual learners. Other strategies that could be used include synthetic phonics programs, reading comprehension strategies, one-on-one instruction, and general differentiation within the class. There is a passionate debate in the educational field that are arguing the correct way to teach reading, either through a skills-based approach or a whole language approach. Skills-based approach has an emphasis on phonics, phonological awareness, and sound blending in order to decode and write texts. The whole language approach allows learners to construct their own knowledge without the need for explicit instruction. Each approach has its own criticisms, but what academics are finding is the need for a balanced approach that involves both whole and skilled methods. As you can see, reading difficulties is a fascinating subject, but today I've only scratched the surface. Hopefully with this information you can conclude that early intervention is key in supporting individual learners within your class.